Patreon bonus content. The time Eiley and Kai got drunk. Anyway, hello.
Hello.
Listeners. Hi. Neither of you are my co-host.
Nope.
No, not lately.
No, you're not. So this is a little bit of a different episode. I think the easiest thing for me to do to kind of get us into the groove a bit is just talk about, well, where's Kai? Kai is dealing with some real life stuff, some serious business, if you will. And that has kept us from recording since, oh, Jesus Christ, April, I want to say.
Noodle.
Yeah, it's been a long time. We were expecting to have content on Old World, The Weekender, and Animosity. This one was 6, right? Or was it 7?
Yeah.
This was 6.
It was 6? 6? Okay. I've played in so many of them I don't actually remember anymore.
Baikal Dominion.
Yeah, Baikal Dominion.
Cat Place, whatever that was. Frozen City,
Scarlands.
Back to Dominion. Yeah, that should be 6.
For Home, Back to Dominion, yeah, so 6. Okay. Thank you, Iron.
Yep.
And additionally to that, I took
one.
a new job, and I ended up been living in Nevada for the past 4 months. And then out of those 4 months, 4 days a week, I live in a tent in the middle of nowhere.
Fun.
So we have not exactly had the time to record. So The Weekender came and went. Animosity 6 came and went. And I didn't make any content. And it kind of falls on me to make that content because I kind of run the actual organizing side of the show. So to that end, I'm trying something new. There's a series I wanted to do for some time, and Kai was supposed to be involved in it, and he probably will be when he comes back, and that is a when. You know, he's fine. He's physically fine. It's just very, very busy.
It's good.
So to that end, I'm starting a new kind of weird series where we talk about Let's Play and then an army. And it's aimed at playing your particular faction in narrative. And that can be Soulbond, that can be narrative campaigns, ranging from different sizes like Nova or Everwinter Con events, to things like Animosity or just smaller scale getting your buddies together for Warcry. So this first episode is going to be Let's Play Non-Traditional Chaos. And to that end, I brought on 2 people. Brought on 2 friends of mine, Iron.
Hello.
And Sasha.
Hello.
Blow it up like a volcano. Like a volcano.
So I picked you two for. So actually, well, let's start with a couple things there. Non-traditional chaos. What we mean by that is we mean basically. Well, how would you define your brands of chaos? Let's do that. How would you define your brand of chaos?
So I've kind of got 2 different, distinct flavors. I'm gonna focus pretty much dominantly on the Age of Sigmar side here, because, well, that's what the podcast's about. So in Age of Sigmar, normally I'd feel inclined to approach chaos from a point of relatability, possible heroism, because as they stand against the Imperium in 40k, I don't think they're that much worse. But in Age of Sigmar, they are. They definitely are. They are the worst. So sort of what I focus on when building a chaos faction leader, etc., for Age of Sigmar is just building a better bad guy. Focusing in on the nuances of what makes someone go bad, who were they before they went bad, how long have they been there, how far down the path are they. Just get in deep and think about who and why and how,
Yeah. Iron, what about you? What's your brand of chaos?
The joke summary I usually give is, what if Bretonia was spiky? But it's escalated to a lot more than that. That just kind of joke is how it started off. Was the idea that Bretonia treats her peasants like crap. Who else treats the random mutants like crap? Chaos Cults. okay, let's get silly. And then it spiraled into
Yeah.
this whole pseudo Arthurian noble bright. We don't recognize the gods, but we follow some of the ideas. Crazy nonsense.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I asked you that first before I had you introduce yourselves because I think that gives a better concept of kind of what we're working with. I will say also that our podcast actually handles all kinds of narrative, including like historicals and stuff. We talk a lot about narrative in a broader sense. It does focus on Age of Sigmar and to an extent the Old World because,
Yeah.
well, that's how this podcast started. You know, that was because Kai and I met playing an Animosity. So, of course, you know, Age of Sigmar, we're both Age of Sigmar players. We take a lot from that. But a lot of what we talk about, I think, is applicable to Warhammer in general, and I think miniatures wargaming as a whole. So I wouldn't, you know, don't be afraid to kind of branch out and think about bigger picture ideas.
Fair enough.
I picked both of you for this because on the one hand, we have what if Bretonnia was spiky? And we have, you know, on some level, you know, that is echoing of this more traditional chaos. And on the other hand, we have a golden retriever gamer boyfriend. So
Yeah. Kavath.
Kavath is-
Kavath?
I love that boy so much.
He was my character in Animosity 6. Was a very popular character. I actually switched to him midway through when well, not even midway through, during the prep stage, when I realized that there was going to be a diplomat option, and I have a chaos character who is both a diplomat and capable of, if not necessarily putting a good face on chaos's wants, at least putting on a palatable face.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, actually, and something that maybe we should come back to in a little bit. But the other reason why I picked you both is that you both play chaos in not the traditional sense. You're not playing these aspirants on the path of skulls. I mean, on some level, you know, you are on the path to glory, but how that manifests is very different. And something that Kai and I have lightly touched on is one of the biggest difficulties you have when you play chaos is you have to be able to actually get along with people. Otherwise, otherwise the narrative doesn't work. So, and there are ways to play, you know, a more traditional chaos that works. I mean, I'm looking at you, Eris Bloodwrath, who was a character in The Weekender who met an untimely demise, but she was very much on the path of skulls, very much so on the path to being a Varangard. You know, that very highly, you know, traditional. I don't know how to put it other than I'm a bad guy.
Yeah,
and her player had to make it work and did make it work very well. But you guys take very different angles on it. So I think now that we've kind of touched on what we are dealing with, you know, what's our subject matter is, you know, playing chaos and not the blood and skull. I keep using Khornate references here, but, you know, not in the blood and skulls plague kind of way, but in the I'm allied with I am chaos, but. And then what comes after that but is something very interesting, something that you wouldn't expect from somebody walking the path. So why don't I'll pose this question to you now. Both of you, give me your origin story. And that can be your Warhammer origin story, that could be your narrative origin story, that could be your miniatures wargaming origin story in general. But what brought you here?
I will be polite and let Iron go first.
Ah, dang it! I don't have a quick answer. Okay,
I'll be polite while I think of something grand and amazing.
Yeah, no. In that case, I will go first because I actually do kind of have the traceable history. I got started in Warhammer in I want to call it shameful, but I'm kind of trying to be kinder to myself. So let's call it a different time. I spent a lot of time on the classic 4chan trad games board, traditional games, when it was brand new. And obviously part of the reason that board ever got started at all was because a lot of other boards were seeing a huge influx of Warhammer 40k posts. So I saw a lot of people on that board talking about like Warhammer 40K, and all I was really into at that time was RPGs, like Dungeons and Dragons third edition or 3.5 at that time. Pathfinder was coming out. I'd play some Fate, stuff like that. So I didn't really have any roots in the wargaming, but just like everyone was describing this insanely dark, over the top, goth, blood drenched nightmare setting Warhammer 40K, and obviously teenage Sasha is like, wow, this sounds like the best thing in the universe. um, so I checked it out, and I've sort of stayed tentatively in and out of Games Workshop as it goes. The current stretch since second edition Age of Sigmar is the longest I've stayed in it, and mostly just towards Age of Sigmar, because I found myself massively drawn to chaos in the 40K scene, but I found that a lot of the way the writing treated them and the Xenos factions was less everyone is equally bad and more these guys are just all uniformly worse than the Imperium, and I couldn't stand that. Because to me, the like screaming football hooligans and evil alien bugs and guys that are like covered in spikes and worship like actual for real red skin and big horns devils and stuff. I just found all of that significantly less scary than the like avatar of genocide and fascism and, just all the most regressive parts of real human nature. Because I just didn't find it a compelling argument that all these cartoon evils were worse than the very real, very banal evil, just because the very real, banal evil were the humans of the setting and had the Space Marines. So I sort of started Age of Sigmar finally in second edition. I want to say shortly after Wrath of the Everchosen came out, and I just really liked that Age of Sigmar's chaos very distinctively are the bad guys, like are measuredly worse than the Team Good Guy factions, or even in some cases death or destruction. But also they have like people and cultures and things that are either standing on the edge of the path of glory or are approaching it in a different way. Like one of my favorites is the Corvus Cabal from Warcry, who are just like weirdo Mad Max bird people who just like steal and assassinate, but are so like different from your normal chaos that instead of being like screaming, raging zealots, some of their higher ranking members have just like forsaken language so that they can be more stealthy. They just do like hand signs, very brief hand signs. And I found that that was a more interesting space to work in than something like if you stage a rebellion against your imperial masters in the next 15 minutes, 8 demons are going to eat your entire family.
Yeah. No, I think that's actually really interesting. I think that's really compelling too, and I think that a sentiment that is certainly echoed among a lot of narrative players is 40K has the potential to be a really interesting narrative setting, but it's certainly a little more difficult due to broad strokes in the setting.
Yeah,
Is something that I think it's talked about a little bit. But I think this is something
yeah,
I think that. Go on.
the extremism is so inherent that it's hard to get any two imperial factions working together, much less the other not really grand alliances who don't get along with each other either.
Yeah, it kind of like ends up putting Xenos as this weird middleman, right? Um,
Hmm.
and that's to put it, lightly, for sure.
Yeah.
Iron, tell me your origin story.
Um, I started mostly in D&D. I don't think I could really tell you how I became aware of Warhammer and Sigmar outside of basic meme stuff you exposed to on the internet. because you're in nerd culture, you're going to see some of that regardless.
Yes.
But it was probably right near the end of first edition Sigmar that I joined up and just dove whole hog into the hobby. I was living out in a very, very rural part of the country, so there wasn't much to do to like just go out and leave the apartment. But bring in a bunch of plastic dudes to build and paint, yeah, that'll keep me busy for hours. And then I just kind of bounced between a lot of different factions, but I'm always a sucker for the heavy plate mail armored cavalry archetype in games. So Slaves to Darkness was a very early option of, hey, this is cool. I don't like these old derpy models. And then they announced the Resculpt the Chaos Knights with that second edition book, and I jumped very hard into that army. And now have a couple thousand points of it.
I think your like actual number that you said was something insane, like 6,000 points.
Oh no!
That's
Slaves
about
of
how
Darkness
much
isn't that
I
big.
also have.
I'm probably only sitting around like 4,000 Slaves of Darkness. It's the
I must be
Skavens.
thinking of Cities
It's
of
Skavens
Sigmar.
and Cities I got out of hand. Those are both pushing like 12.
Oh, Jesus. And the insane part is it's almost all painted. Like I just want to
yeah.
put that out there.
Yeah,
This man has
Oh
like
my
8
gosh.
armies and well over 2,000 points in each and every one of them, and almost all of it is painted. And when I say almost all of it, I don't mean like he has 1 or 2 of those 9 armies that aren't painted. I mean he has a full over 2,000 points of every single one of those armies painted. And with cities, it's something insane like over 10,000 points painted. The man is crazy.
Oh
When
my
I did
gosh.
the math towards the end of 3rd edition, I was sitting at 13,000. And the city's points went up, not down, with the edition change, by and large. So that's probably
yeah,
closer to
it's-
15 now.
Yeah, I was
And
gonna
that's
say
factoring
since...
in that I started collecting cities off the Firestorm rules.
Oh my goodness, cool.
Yeah. No, the first army I
Yeah.
properly built as like a, hey, this is not just start collecting boxes. This is what I want to do as an army. Was first edition Tempest Die rules. When it was Free Guild, Ironweld Arsenal, Caradron, and Stormcast in any combination.
Yeah.
Was it Tempest Eye or was that the Lethis?
That was
Army
Tempest Die.
list.
Oh god, no, Lethis was a mess. Lethis allowed Caradron, Fireslayers, Deepkin, not any Free Guild units, Stormcast, and the Excelsior War Priest.
I forgot about the Excelsior War Priest.
And
Just
then-
dredged that one up.
The army rules gave Dwarf Infantry a bonus when charged, gave specifically Redeemer Stormcast, so at that point in time, Liberators and Sequitors a bonus when charged, had a buff for Akellian Deepkin, so just the cavalry, and had a buff for Magmadroths. It's like, really? We're calling this an army rule?
This is
A little silly. Yeah.
it definitely builds itself. Like you somehow took 4 armies, mashed them together, and it builds itself.
It sure was something. I think I played it once and went, okay. No.
Okay.
I'll just stick with the Tempest Eye PDF that you had to download off Warcom. It was literally 1 page with half of that being a picture and still had your lore and your rules for what Tempest Eye was.
Oh my gosh.
That is the best.
I think my first 2,000 points in Age of Sigmar were somewhat ironically Soulblight. Just because I got into this groove where I was just buying skeletons, and I didn't stop buying skeletons, and I still haven't stopped buying skeletons. I have so many
no.
skeletons. It's the only thing I like more than chaos is skeletons. And
I love that.
yeah, I right now in fourth edition, I have an army of uh Manfred, White King, a Necromancer, and then 90 skeletons.
Whew.
Man, remember in second edition when that number was like 200 plus after
God.
after all of the Mortarks? Oh
Yeah.
my god, that was a time. What about a narrative? What drew you into narrative?
I started with D&D real early, and reading fantasy books as a kid. And when we talked about doing this, I realized that one of those book series had a pretty big influence on my Slaves of Darkness army nowadays.
Which one?
It was the Dragonlance series,
Mhm.
which is one of those really old D&D settings from before Wizards of the Coast.
Oh right, wow, I forgot
Yeah.
about that. Jeez.
Like, the whole gimmick of that setting was that good and evil are always at war, but neither is allowed to win at any point. And so at one point, the Empire of Good got really strong, and the gods dropped an asteroid in their capital. Because
This sounds like an Age of Sigmar setting.
a little bit. But so
Dragonlance gets there, yeah.
yeah, like, it somehow straddles the line between very traditional fantasy and there's crazy Age of Sigmar style stuff in there. And it just kind of flips back and forth at a drop of a hat. But in particular, there was a couple books about the original cast kids. And one of those kids joined evil. He was a kid of one of the good characters. And evil won the big war in the first series because evil always backstabs itself. Like, that was the point they kept making throughout the series, is that evil never got to a position where the gods had to or bombard them, because evil will just take care of itself. Whereas good will actually work together to be a coherent army and be a problem. But when that kids got around, the leaders of evil realized the good guys have a point here. And they made a highly disciplined, honor-bound Order of Dark Knights, and very nearly took over the whole world with it. Because they took all of the inherent weaknesses you see in evil, and how Games Workshop usually portrays chaos, and just said, we don't need that. We're not going to backstab our bosses. We're not going to turn on each other to drop the hat. We're going to actually work together and get the job done.
Aren't kids amazing?
So
I know. I think you're right though. Like on some level, I think I can definitely see how that played a role in your army, because you definitely do bring that to the table. And as a player, you've always been somebody that's very much on the we actually need to work together, or we're never getting anywhere in this campaign.
Yeah. Like, we can run around, we can do our own things, but there's a big fight over there, and if we don't win the fight, we're not going to win the whole war, so let's go win that fight. And then we'll worry about who stabbed who.
So, one of the things I really
thank
want to draw
God.
a couple connections to there was, you both said it in different ways, but in Age of Sigmar, I think Sasha put it a lot more plainly, but I think you say it, it's more of a takeaway from Iron, but it's Chaos is demonstrably the bad guys in Age of Sigmar. And
What?
to an extent...
No. That's Nagash.
Nagash, too. Definitely Nagash.
definitely the worst individual in the setting, and that's a pretty stiff competition.
It definitely is, especially when you've got Archon kicking around.
The rest of us are good guys because we're trying to stop Nagash. Y'all are welcome.
Yeah.
I see. That's actually the whole thing. Is no. It's that's how you get evil to work together. Is you give them something worse.
Yeah. A much scarier bad guy.
But even though Chaos is definitely up there for the worst, and certainly not, Sigmar is arguably not in competition with Chaos. And I only use the word arguably because there are some more grimdark tones we are starting to get in some of the free cities, but certainly nowhere to the extent of being a member of Chaos. And
Yeah.
yet, they are infinitely more sympathetic in this setting still than they are
Yeah,
in
and
40K. And to an extent, the old world. I think the old world kind of splits the difference a little bit between those two, and it kind of doesn't really do it well. I'll be honest. I'll be completely honest. It does not do it very well. But that's a really interesting angle, though, is you are demonstrably probably the worst, and yet you are still more sympathetic than your representation
yeah,
in other settings.
yeah, yeah. To me, the big difference is that when Age of Sigmar positions Chaos as a superpower, as a giant thing that encompasses and threatens the setting from the edges in, instead of doing the 40K thing where it just assumes anybody from the biggest, baddest Chaos Lord wearing armor made of flayed skin to the simplest cultist who can just get like obliterated with a sharp glance from a space marine. Um, Age of Sigmar takes those low-level people and actually talks about their victimization under the colonization of the mortal realms versus 40K just like assuming the second you fall to chaos, you're like a deadite from Evil Dead. You're just immediately a psycho.
Yeah, that is a big thing. Is when you look at the Chaos Law, there is a sub theme to it anymore that kind of looks like Europeans colonizing the Americas,
Yeah.
and that the
Yeah,
Chaos
'cause like
people, like Dark Ghosts in particular, have been living here for centuries. Yeah, it's not
Mhm.
been the civilized life that Azerites know, but they didn't need the Azerites to come and bring them civilization. They had it.
yeah,
Exactly.
and they go into a lot of that in God Eater's Son, which is a
Oh yeah.
fabulous read if you're looking to up your chaos game. Um, but yeah, it is like it's one of those where the shades of gray are really apparent because no, they don't really need the Azerites, but there's also a certain extent of not totally realizing how bad it actually is or can get under chaos, which is sort of a feeling I relate to every time I open the news as an American. Just like, oh, we're doing that today, huh?
Oof, we went there.
Oh
Yeah.
yes, yep, yeah. I as an archaeologist, I can relate
Mm-hmm.
to these comments on European colonization. It is
Mm-hmm.
definitely something that I have to reckon with every day. Is I have this job because of some really bad shit that happened.
Yeah.
That's putting it mildly. But I think that's a really good angle to take on this too, is because it's absolutely right. Is I think that maybe is the crux of representing chaos in the non-traditional sense. I don't want to say non-40K sense because I think that's a little reductive
Yeah.
to 40K, but
I
I don't know a
yeah,
better word for the non-traditional
I
is
mean, it isn't. It
representing
isn't.
the struggles of the people that made that choice or perhaps didn't have that choice. Sorry,
yeah, never had it in the first place.
I was gonna say no. It both is reductive to 40K, but it's not because even when you read like the novels about the different Chaos chapters and warbands, they're still mostly the same.
Yeah, they're just like it's
It's
just like
They
war
shout a different
crimes.
god's name. They put a different color paint on their armor.
Yeah.
Maybe commit a different atrocity or have a special gun they like, but by and large, they feel awfully similar.
Yeah.
Granted, maybe I've not read the Horus Heresy books. Maybe they break out more there,
I've heard they do,
but
but I can't imagine
that's
it's by
also
much,
30K and not 40Ks,
which is very different.
that's a different mess on
Well, I
its
mean,
own.
like the
Yeah.
difference in chaos representation though, like compare 40Ks to in 30K, the whole the Death Guard are actually I haven't read it, but I do know people that did, and one of the things that they talk about is the Death Guard are actually a lot more sympathetic in 30K because they didn't go to Nurgle willingly. One individual spread Nurgle's corruption through the whole chapter and turned them. But
Yeah.
no actual foot soldier willingly went to Nurgle. I don't know if it was like spreading
Yeah.
Nurgle's route or something, but it was literally one guy turned the whole chapter. And not like in the Lorgar sense where like somebody's whispering in Horus's ear or something like that. It's not like
Yeah.
that. It's very different. But
Not
then you look at the
Erebus-y.
Death Guard in 40K and they are arguably the farthest from sympathetic.
Yeah, they're just like zombies.
Like now they're just actually turning people into zombies.
Yeah.
But, in 30K, it's like a horrifying turn to see because they didn't want to do it.
One
And,
of the things I think that really this is similar is that makes Chaos kind of stand out to me in Age of Sigmar is that it kind of positions the Chaos Warrior thing on up, including signing yourself onto a single god as like the point where you've jumped off the slippery slope. So like your Dark Oath and your maybe even some lesser Chaos Warriors, maybe even as far as some Chaos Lords can be like people. But the second you start chanting the name of one of the big four Eldritch ones and doing all the things they like to do, you're kind of just becoming a vessel for their will, and their will is to just do shitty stuff all the time because it pleases them.
No, I think that's...
Yeah, I'd
true.
agree. They're real good about making that change here.
Yeah.
And they are, and that's actually something that I wasn't expecting. This conversation was how heavily it engages with the more traditional view of chaos as well.
Yeah.
And on some level, perhaps I'm realizing doing this episode is I have done this dichotomy horribly wrong, and that you can't really separate out the traditional from the non-traditional chaos. But
Yeah, I think Age of
Or
Sigmar...
you have stereotypical.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think Age of Sigmar splits the difference really well. Maybe not all the time, but no Games Workshop thing is perfect. We're gonna lose our sponsorship because I just said that.
yes, the sponsorship where Kai and I swear routinely. And Kai and I have gotten far more in depth into American politics by accident on this podcast than you guys
Yeah.
did. Like, Iron's like, oh man, we just went there, and I'm like, oh please, you haven't even started it.
Yeah. I'm kind of like skirting around the edges of it, but there are a lot of thoughts I have that are kind of like comparing the situation with the Age of Sigmar Chaos to just like American policy over the last 300 years.
Well, I mean, I think, and this is probably me saying this is probably not going to get into the episode. Full disclosure, but what I will
Yeah,
say
all good.
is the angle that I have always taken on this podcast is this is an academic discussion of the role of narrative in human history from an anthropology sense and in a personal
Yeah.
sense, and how we relate to
Yeah.
that. And a lot of stories come with political connotations because, well, like it or not, everything is political on some level. Even saying
Yeah.
I'm trying to be apolitical is in fact a political statement, right? And that's not meant to be
Yes, yeah.
reductive towards it, but that is meant to say, the Iliad has lasted this long. Well, guess what? The Iliad was politics at one point. What was going on
Yeah.
was politics. What was going on
Yeah.
was a war, and war is political. So I would say, yeah, I mean, screw it as you will. I mean, we're not a politics podcast. We're not going to get into talking about the election, but say,
Yeah, I'm not
hey,
g-
this
yeah.
era of human history
No.
is, I think, something that we can relate to. Is actually probably a really good thing to talk about.
Yeah, like to kind of put it in terms without like name dropping anything, sort of like the difference to me is like an unaligned like citizen of a chaos empire or even on up to like a more fighting Dark Oath warrior is sort of like uh, a person, an American citizen, they benefit from the thing of it, but they're not quite to the point of being like cheeseburger freedom man. If you don't like it, go home.
Yeah,
Wearing
exactly. I think
wearing
that's a good way to
American
Yep.
American flag shorts and American flag sunglasses while chugging a Budweiser at a beach and throwing the empty can on the ground kind of a person.
No, I mean, I think that I think there's a real conversation there about, one of the
Yeah.
ways that we write, how we showcase chaos is showcasing what the average Joe looks like underneath it, and realizing that they also have gripes and, bluntly, complaints with the administration, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
they do benefit from their lords who are over the deep end already. And I mean, I didn't read
Yeah.
God Eater's
Oh,
Son.
yeah.
I actually intended to speed read God Eater's Son before this episode, and I didn't get around to it. But
Oh.
I think that's one of the
Can
things.
It's worth
recommend it.
taking the time to read proper and not just blitz through.
That's fair.
Yes, yeah.
If it's that good, that is the highest praise I think I've ever heard of a Black Library book.
Yes,
It's-
yeah. I would say it is one of
It's the
the
kind of Black Library book that if it wasn't published saying Warhammer on the title, it might have done decently well just as a general fantasy book.
I think there's a lot of those that do well. And actually, funny enough,
Yes.
the story I was going to talk about is actually one of the earliest Gotrek and Felix short stories. Is one that really stuck with me on Chaos. And I'm going to spoil a 30-year-old short story.
Wow.
Oh no!
So I guess fast forward a minute or two if you don't want spoilers, but it's about Gotrek and Felix roll into this village, and I mean, again, this is written in like 4th or 5th edition Fantasy Battles. I want to say I don't
Yeah.
think it's 6th edition yet, which is important because that's when a lot of Warhammer as we know it today came about. Was around that end of 5th, beginning of 6th. Kind of turn, and then that happened again, tail end of 7th, going into 8th. That happened again, but
yeah.
they roll into this village and they show up, and the village has a completely new built lumber wall, and they roll in, and they basically, the first thing that happens is everybody's pointing like weapons at them, and they're like, well, what the fuck's going on? And they find out that there has been a Chaos Lord that has been attacking this place time and time again. And the story does a really good job panning back and forth between between Felix's view of the situation and this Chaos Warrior. And she is just a lone Chaos Warrior. And it comes out that the reason why she turned to Chaos was she had, and I guess content warnings here, she had been sexually assaulted by a noble's son and had gotten pregnant. And she had run out of the castle and ran just into the woods. Well, the woods have a ton of beastmen. And she got taken in by the kind of like the midwives of the beastmen, and they had delivered her kid. And the thing that she had noted was that it was so astounding to her because she had always been told all her life that beastmen would only kill you if they saw you. But some beastmen saw her and said, she needs help, and took her in. And that's what turned her to Chaos, was because she went anywhere else in the Empire, and I would have been basically thrown out as a tramp.
Or turned into property.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So she turns to Chaos, and she becomes a Chaos Warrior. And she actually, in this story, there's like, she raids that village 2 or 3 times, and they fight her a couple times. And on the second one, she kills the man responsible.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, Gotrek and
And
Felix.
she
on her.
like
Yeah,
her master
good
is this
for
like
her.
keeper of secrets, or it might be a bloodthirster. It's not actually clear to me. I don't remember. But and then when she realizes like she killed him, and she goes back and she realizes she doesn't want to be here anymore. She's like, I don't want to be in
Yeah.
Chaos anymore. And she realizes she's too far gone, because she realized
Yeah.
that her fuel was actually the entirely sympathetic cause of revenge for what somebody did to her. The unspeakable act somebody did to her. So, and I'm going to spoil the ending for it because I think it's beneficial,
Yeah.
but she gets laid low by Gotrek, but can't be killed by him. Her daughter that she delivered the baby and then left it in the village and then joined Chaos, picks up her sword and kills her.
Mm.
And her last thought is, I'm finally free, because this is the best justice I could have asked for my child.
Sweet. That's cool. That's really, really like hammers home the like neo-feudal end of the age of barbarism that that era of Warhammer Fantasy was covering. Because there's a lot of themes like that in second edition Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, which was, let me tell you, finding out that they did a Chaos book, finding a copy in my FLGS for a decent price and reading it, like, you fucking rewired my entire brain.
Yeah, I haven't. I don't. I actually have that book because I got it off the Humble Bundle like a couple years ago, but I haven't read it yet. But maybe I'm gonna have to read it.
Yes, yeah. Them taking it to digital, Cubicle 7 saving that line was just like one of the many reasons I'll buy any Warhammer crap they put out at this point.
They
Fair.
Cubicle 7 is. I just want to, like, as an aside, Cubicle 7 is amazing for narrative Warhammer. It is the
Yes.
narrative, like it explores my personal, favorite space. It explored like the humans of Gorka Morka, um, and what
Yeah.
it takes to be that kind of person.
What? You like Orca Morca humans? I never would have
Oh no,
guessed.
who would have thought? Um, so
Yeah, that was funnily enough, I never quite got around to answering how I got in narrative play, and obviously RPGs have been the thing. Like my story is pretty comparable to Irons, but what got me into Age of Sigmar narrative play was Soulbound just like busting wide open on how many stories are actually possible in this setting.
oh,
To to
Sasha, are
me,
you there?
Soulbound
Doing.
did. Can you hear me?
You cut out. You cut
Oh,
out,
there
but
you
the
are again.
recording kept going. So keep going.
Yes, yeah, it was still, and it was still recording on my end too. My Audacity was still running. So,
Yeah.
um, any rate, I was saying, Soulbound kind of busted wide open for me all the possibilities that Age of Sigmar has as a setting. And one of the big like one of the big things for that is that I think Soulbound did for Age of Sigmar what Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay did for Warhammer Fantasy, which was take kind of a little interesting, written out, but not really fully fleshed out nugget of a setting where people hit each other with sticks for all eternity and turned it into like a world where people live and eat food and file taxes and kiss each other and shit. It's like it's a world now. It's not just a place setting. It's not like Eternia where you can smash your He-Man action figures together. It's a place.
Yeah, and that's really fair, and it's definitely gotten better over the years. I mean, after all, thanks to Nagash, now paying your taxes is front and center in the setting.
Yes, yeah, there's a significant amount of tax paying now in multiple bodily vital functions.
The wonders of capitalism, brought to you by Nagash and Grugny.
Gotta love them. Gotta love them. But yeah, so the what you were talking about, her kind of gaining freedom for by just dying on the pinnacle, it's sort of I was thinking the other day about Kavath Slaveborn, my animosity OC, who's been a chaos OC of mine for a while, and this was his first time front and center in front of other people, and I'm so glad he did well because the other day I was thinking about him and kind of what themes I like to emphasize, and the big one that came to me was um I when I've been writing Kavath stories in my own time, one of the influences is noir and especially neo-noir, modern crime stories like the Vince Gilligan's Breaking Bad saga, Breaking Bad, El Camino, Better Call Saul. And I sort of sat down the other day and thought, well, in what way is Kavath like those series? What's the thematic through line? And I sort of came on the driving question of those series, which is how many bad things can a good person do before they stop being a good person?
Yeah.
It's a good way to approach chaos.
Yeah, and so Kavath has obviously done a lot of fucked up stuff as steward of Karngrad. And so obviously the question I kind of wanted to challenge people with in that chat, in his role, is how much of that was survival and how much of that was just the possibility that he is just, as monstrous as the rest of them.
And that's been really fun to watch. Is the insane part
Yeah.
is because at times I look at him and I'm like, oh my gosh, I love him, and at other times I'm like, wow, he's a terrible person.
Yeah.
But it does. But you still, we all still root for him. Is the thing.
Yeah,
and I think everybody involved who has interacted with him has found that he's been really fun to watch. I mean, he's been so closely tied to this order, this cause that is inherently rooted in preserving a people that are much more likely to side with Sigmar than Chaos. Because he feels the impetus to do so, even though, Karing Sarn, the figurehead, was a third circle of Erengard, but he gets exiled he gets cast out, essentially at the end for his failures. Did he get killed or did he get cast out?
He got cast out.
Okay.
But
he's still alive
and
kicking.
You would be forgiven for thinking that he died because almost every single other Chaos figurehead has died, especially from Karing Sarn's era.
Oh god, I can tell you the stories on that front.
Mostly because Iron is probably responsible for at least one of them.
No, but I was there for all of the deaths.
Yeah, we would basically. So Karing, history lesson time. Karing Sarn is actually a figurehead from the first Animosity, I think.
Wow.
He was a character in it.
Yeah.
Over the
first Age of Sigmar one, they were one of the first figureheads.
Yeah, and then in Animosity 2, he wasn't really present, but there was another Chaos.
No, he was present.
Because he's the only Chaos figurehead that doesn't get Chaos spawned. Chaos went through 3 or 4 figureheads in the span of turns 3.
We had 5 by the end of it.
In turns 3 through 5, all the figureheads died.
So we went into the event with 2 Varengard in charge. One was Karing Sarn, the Khorne and Nurgle Alliance one, and the other was a Tzeentch and Slaanesh one, who was also a returning character from the first Sigmar Animosity. Then we had this third one show up, I think week 1, just called the Emissary. They didn't have any name art in that. The Emissary and the Tzeentch Slaanesh one were both turned to spawn at the end of week 2. Because we royally got our butts kicked.
Damn.
So then we got Eris as one of these new acolytes following Carrag around. And then because we were still using named characters, Gutrot Spume showed up.
Ooh.
Who is the Nurgle named character, now Legends, whose whole bit was they're a pirate. Just a Nurgle pirate. And they showed up and we spent the last 3 weeks of that Animosity trying to escort their Kraken ship across the frozen lake.
Yeah.
It got charged.
Because somehow we got the Ghost Whale corpse. I think that was the only path we won the entire campaign.
Chaos got its
we got
butt
one
kicked
win.
that campaign. Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah, so part of it was diplomacy was an unofficial thing. But what it really meant was all the non-Chaos factions, because they were so roughly Grand Alliance aligned, except 4 of the 6 had an Order figurehead, and 2 were Chaos. So whenever anyone got the chance to go against the Chaos one, they just threw everything they could at it, because haha, Chaos is bad.
Yeah. Actually,
And
I keep going, but I've got to.
That helped radicalize me on the Chaos is not bad stance.
And I definitely want to turn more to you, Iron, in a little bit here. But one of the things that I do also want to touch on, just as a, mostly for I think Sasha's information, is this is the first Animosity since Animosity 2, and even then it was not nearly as stark as 2. Or sorry, even then 2 was not nearly as stark as now, where the alliances were built on Grand Alliances. And to show how well the formula worked this go-around, there were multiple individuals from different Grand Alliances that found themselves in the mismatch allegiance. I think there were several Chaos players in Dawnguard. There was several truly Order players in the Tetrarchy. There was all sorts of interesting stuff going on there. I mean, we had multiple.
Oh, we were just born in the Arms of Azure. We had 2 vampires, and that was it for weird stuff.
Oh, okay. I mean, over in Undesired, we it was kind of funny that Skaven got their own faction essentially, but it worked out really well because we had 2 Destruction players. We had an Order player, and then they swapped to Skaven, and we had a Soulblight player. I forgot about because we had Mios Altengard. So we had a Soulblight player too. We were just like completely the most random assortment of crap. But to show you, but I say this to mean that in Animosity 2, this is important for discussing, the role of playing chaos in a narrative, be it Soulbound or a campaign or just a Warcry thing. Or in 40K or anything else that you're doing, or just playing, a different kind of bad guy in anything, is in Animosity 2, the setup was supposed to be odd bedfellows. So, like, the Destruction faction was Destruction and then Idoneth. Because the Idoneth wanted souls. Well, who makes a lot of souls? Oh, the Orcs. The Orcs do. So let's go hang out with them. Because they'll do all the killing and we'll get all the souls. Chaos. There was the Chaos. Was there 1 or 2 Chaos factions?
There were 2 Chaos factions. One was Skaven and Beastmen, and the other was all other Chaos.
Yeah, so we had the more bestial Chaos and the more...
It was Fuzzy Chaos and not...
Yeah, exactly.
For lack of better.
Which in and of themselves...
Not to put too fine a point on it.
Yeah, which in and of themselves are weird bedfellows, right? Because Beastmen and Skaven are never going to get along in the same way that if you put all 4 Chaos gods together, they're never going to get along. And then there was 2 Order factions. There was one that was much more focused on kind of the Free City style, although this was, I think, before Free Cities was really a thing.
Cities was a thing.
It was, that's right.
Because that would have been 2020.
Because Voldablade
Because Lumineth came out halfway through the campaign.
Stormcast. Right, so you have your more, like, not quite Stormcast oriented, but your more Cities of Sigmar oriented one. And then you have your, like, Pilgrims of Sigmar that are going on this crazy religious pilgrimage. They were literally called the Pilgrimage.
They were Pilgrims of Cain.
That's right.
It was a Daughters of Cain faction.
It was, and it had a lot of Cities of Sigmar in it too. It was really interesting.
The Cities faction was just straight up we're the expedition from Hammerhall here to settle.
Another 20 trillion for Cain.
And then the 6th faction that made for the bizarre one was All of Death, led by Reichor, the Ghost Skeleton, the Night Haunt on the Reichor, the Night Haunt on the Pegasus.
There was one other figurehead for them, though.
And a Slawn.
Yeah, a Slawn. That's what it was.
A literal Slawn.
So this is relevant
that's hilarious.
Because this experience, though, Iron, made you very much on the Chaos aren't the bad guys. In a campaign...
pretty much had to be, because no one else was.
Exactly.
But we look at that, all the Grand Alliances have incentives to work together to some extent. Except the Chaos, you got told to sit in the corner and be bad guys in punching bags.
Yeah, go be evil.
Because even like the meta plot they had going on made it look like Chaos was doing the various things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, of course, when the chance came to punch Chaos, we did that. Of course, when there was a big diplomacy meeting between all the factions that ended up getting blown up by ogres, of course Chaos wasn't even invited to the table.
Yeah.
Because we were the bad guys. And there's a reason there's like 2 people from either of those coalitions who played in any further Animosity events.
Oh, yeah.
Because it just was not a great experience to be that punching bag for all those
And
weeks.
I think that's a big reason why the only reason why the coalitions were split among Grand Alliances was because there was literally a designated punching bag. This is a thing that they have said publicly before, that they're like, we're not going to do that again.
Yeah.
Because that sucked.
Yeah.
That sucked.
I really, really, really enjoyed doing Animosity this year. Also, I'm glad it basically only happens once a year, except for the mini events.
Yeah, no. If this was an ongoing thing, it would be a disaster. It would be
Yeah,
it would be so hard to do. But
yeah, or like even just like every 4 months, I'd have to like pick and choose the ones I show up to because I'd stress myself out bad trying to do them all.
I definitely would too. And I played the same army for 4 years straight, 5 years straight,
Yeah,
really. You know, in spirit, I think Socrates lived on in the Finker, so I really played like the
Yep.
same army for 5 years. So I don't know what I'm gonna do now. Holy, that was 5 years ago.
Yes.
Insert like the Santa Claus gif
Yep.
here of like when he watches
Lake
himself in the
Baikal
mirror
was
with the white beard. I'm like,
Lake Baikal was 2020.
oh my
whenever I
God.
think whenever I think of like somebody aging rapidly, I always think of the ending of Last Crusade when he
Yeah.
drinks out of the false grail and he just like
Yes. That's a good image for it.
I love Steven Spielberg because he always knows how to put on like that extra like
Knows where
um
the extra is needed.
yeah, like the aging into dust thing is creepy, but the fact that he like grabs his mate and puts his hand on his shoulder just makes it so much worse. And that's I'm a GM in terms of narrative, and so I borrow a lot from cinema when I'm GMing. I like to always sort of have like an idea of what if this was a movie or a TV show or something, what would that be? And so a lot of the time when I'm running specifically chaos campaigns, I think of it in terms of a Tarantino movie, where you have these characters,
Yes.
you
Yes.
like them, you love them. They're not good people. They're badass. They're arguably fighting on the right side, especially in something like Django Unchained or Inglorious Bastards. But if you were to do what they're doing to people who were slightly more normal than, say, the Nazis or chattel slavers or something like that, you'd have a person who's just evil. Just bad news.
Well, let's explore that angle further, and I'll pose this question to Iron. So I don't want to say that traditional chaos is not sympathetic. It certainly has its sympathies. But
It can
perhaps to
be,
play the
yeah.
non-traditional chaos is to pose the question how far is too far, and when do
Mhm.
you stop seeing me? Maybe not stop seeing the character as a person, but you finally make up your mind that they're evil.
Yeah, when did they become a proxy for the will of the gods?
And Iron, I want to ask you that question because I think you toy with this a lot more.
Oh, I definitely
Overtly,
towed
I
that
should say.
line for a long time. And I think ultimately where I settled was it was just someone's glib remark after A2 was they didn't realize, despite the fact that I was in the Chaos team, they didn't realize I was playing Slaves to Darkness until the final unfolding mentioned Chaos Knights explicitly. Because I'd spent the whole event role playing like a Arthurian knight in
That is so
every
rad.
channel.
That is excellent.
And just referred to my army was the Knights of the Everking. Well, it's Age of Sigmar. How many different people could you call an Everking and go, yep, that tracks?
Yeah.
Sigmar? Sure.
Good.
Nagash? Yeah.
Usheron?
Usheron? Well,
Yeah.
at that point, we couldn't really get away with Usheron.
He
on
didn't
that one.
exist yet, but
He
you know what I
existed, but we
mean.
just knew he was weird.
Yeah.
I
Some
mean,
of
he's
the-
still weird.
Well, yes. Some of the Mortarks? Yeah.
Yeah,
He was
Neferata
locked
would
in
let
a
herself be
box.
called Everking.
But so the angle I instead of going as where's the line where you stop being a good guy is why do we ask where the line is? Make them ask the whole way up. Wait, you're a bad guy? Oh yeah, we just honor the four spirits, the warrior, the scholar, the gardener, and the lady. And they stand for these
so
things.
For the lady.
Well, sure.
For the lady.
No one question
If you
no one questions an order of knights who worship or reveal the paragon of martial excellence. No one's going to question an order who their whole thing is preserving knowledge. That doesn't sound evil. And then you start getting, well, what are they doing with this? Well, we're just fighting to save our people. You know, we're fighting off the Fae who live in the forest. You know, led by that witch. You know the witch, the one who's half tree. That witch.
I mean, for God's sake, they flay people. Like, they have these scary bald dudes that just torture people to death. That's messed up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But just taking the whole other angle of, if I don't tell you explicitly that I'm playing Chaos, can you figure it out? And that was also a running joke the first time we were in Prime Dominion. I was playing the Everking's Royal Order of Witchfinders.
Not hunters,
Ooh.
finders.
Yes, very
that was an
explicitly
important
witch
distinction.
Finders.
Yes.
We
yeah.
did not go and kill the witches we found. We tried to protect them and recruit them and offer them paperwork to be sanctified. That doesn't sound evil at all.
Until you realize it's literally a black ship.
It's a bunch of people didn't realize it was disciples of Tzeentch as my army until the final unfolding, and my leader turned into a demon prince to go fight one of the figureheads.
Yeah, you fought a Lucidrod, and it was it a Lucidrod? Yeah, no, you fought the mind of a Lucidrod. It was awesome.
Yeah, the like
Oh my lord.
illusion,
that is
solid
epic.
light thing he made to help back up the vampire. No, my Witchfinder general seemed to die in battle, got up as this entity of fire, and started chasing it around the castle, yakety sack playing in the background. Meanwhile, the people who were actually in Adusarod's faction were doing some sort of Ocean's 11 scheme to try to usurp their boss.
So
Look who
I'm
look who the filthy rebels are. It's not the person who's this glorious flaming knight fighting the laser witch in the sky.
Yeah, so Sasha, I'll give you a little bit more context here, because
Context is needed.
and actually no, we're gonna do this reveal live. So, do you remember in the unfolding there was this bit where Titar Muntek, who you don't know who that is, but you probably remember the name,
Yeah.
got onto a throne that they talked about they had used for a while and took off in temple ships?
Yes.
Okay, so
I had to think about it, but yes.
yeah, it was definitely a line aimed at the Animosity 3 veterans and not the
Yeah,
just like an
yeah,
epilogue.
I
like
remember-
week 3.
There was a
Just
lot of Easter eggs. in
The
this
skink being
setting.
like,
Yes.
nope, tapping out. I don't want
Yeah.
to be here anymore.
So Titar Muntek was in Animosity 3. There was a thing called an equerry, and the equerry was the right hand. It was an NPC. It's the right hand of the figurehead, and you could place the equerry, and it gave you a report bonus. At the time, it was not explicitly stated how bonuses worked. We just knew it made our chances better. But every time that
Yeah.
you lost a path that you placed the equerry got weaker. What happened in Animosity 3 was supposed to be this thing where it's elf civil war. It's elf Game of Thrones, essentially.
Yeah.
And the idea was
Oh my
nobody
God.
knows who the vampire is. Any of the leaders could be a vampire, and we got to get rid of those because they really didn't like
Ooh.
it, because the reason why they had the satraps, the six-way split territory in this tiny island, was because the last unified leader turned out to be a soul blight that was killing people, so they had to kill him, and then they split. Spoiler alert, nobody was the vampire. The vampire was Mithridates Ulti, or as you would know them as Attica.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So
Surprise.
Ulti is the big
Yeah.
bad, and we all got to decide who we sided with.
Yeah.
My faction, the Dornier, was the only one that sided with Ulti, because he gave a good message, but we said the second that you try to hurt civilians, we're turning against you. And he said, yeah, we can absolutely follow those terms. And I'm not joking when I say the next thing that comes out is the ping for the turns, that the turns have dropped, and Ulti's bombarding the city, and bombarding.
Oh my
innocents.
god.
So we immediately betrayed him. But our figurehead,
That's
Lucidra,
brutal.
who accepted the blood kiss, he sat on a throne. It's not quite the golden throne. It's like, imagine like the golden throne and the Matrix had a baby, and that's
It's-
kind of what you
Oh
get.
my god.
He could
It's the
Like a
control.
chair-
Lotus Eater machine.
If you know DC Comics and the New Gods there,
Metron's chair?
it's Metron's chair.
Okay.
where it lets him basically go anywhere and see the past and future.
And Titar Muntek was his equerry. So basically the short of it is Titar kills Elucidrad, and at the end of it does sit on the chair, but doesn't do anything with it. And so then this line in Animosity 6 is, uh-oh, Titar Muntek's doing something with the chair, and then they left. And it's like, oh crap. What do we do
Yeah,
now?
I'm sure that will come
there
up
were a
again
couple of those.
whenever we get to Azure.
Oh, yeah.
So probably next summer.
There were a couple of those epilogues where I was kind of like, wait, what?
I will say, I feel like, given how many new players there were this year and how many of them stuck it out, I think they struck the balance right. But I mention all of this.
So, yeah.
I mentioned this stuff to you just so you have some context for what Iron is talking about. So, Iron, I know that was a 10-minute tangent, but you're talking about masquerading the chaos, and most importantly, keeping your peers masquerading it not because your characters have ulterior motives, but because you are trying to make a meta-narrative point.
Yeah, and because our goals don't look evil. You can be chaos without being a Saturday morning cartoon villain. You don't have to be Mumra and Skeletor to join chaos.
Yeah. Part of the reason that I felt that it was important for Kavath to work with the group to not like sneaky Game of Thrones thing is because one of the other themes I like to emphasize with Kavath is duty. And he believes that just regardless of who he's working for, he has a duty to make sure that whatever he's been hired to do gets done. And normally he's fully capable of doing that. So like a war with so many different variable factors was such an exciting place for him to be totally out of his freaking element.
And one of the things I do want to draw attention to is, yes, duty. But one of the things that I really noticed about Kavath was it's not that he has this necessarily an honor complex where he, he's like, no, I've got to do this job because I was told to do this job. Yeah. It's actually like his sense of duty is extremely relatable in that he's just an honest to God, very hard working man.
Yeah.
And he just believes in the ethic of hard work. And that's one of
professionalism.
Yeah. And that's I think one of the things that really made him land so well with the community was they see that and they recognize that I need to get this job done. But at no point did it feel like he was acting outside of his own motives. At no point did it seem like he's like, no, it's this higher calling. It's like, no, this is who he is. Mm-hmm. He is a person. It's just somebody that believes in hard work. And I think on a certain level, I think that really illustrates an important point in making non-traditional chaos is the individual morals of the character still shine through and are compelling. What that character believes in is still compelling because it goes so far above blood and skulls. It goes so far above no. Like it goes above the duty being I've got to walk the path to glory and slaughter everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's
you gotta become the biggest Billy badass on the block.
Exactly. It's a belief, not a. I don't want to say it's the line between belief and ambition, but maybe it is. I feel like that's not quite accurate. I think there's a better way to put that, but that's the way that I'm able to do it right now in this moment.
Yeah, because, like, to me, he's sort of... He's still not totally sure about the path and where he belongs on it. He knows he's on it, but he's not totally convinced that it's his role to go full... to become a lord, to become a sorcerer lord, anything like that, you know?
Exactly, because at the end of the day, he's an accountant. He's literally
Yeah.
like, I don't think we've ever actually talked about it. Kavoth is literally an accountant.
Yes, yeah. So I didn't really give an intro. I feel like it's a little late at this point in the recording, but
Nah,
yeah,
it's not
Kavath's
late.
whole like gig is that where he started versus where he is versus where he is after Animosity is that when he started basically exiled from his tribe because he was a big nerd, only to come back and learn that his tribe of snake people, without having exiled their intellectual class because they're not proper warriors, basically hoarded all the food over one winter and then ate it all till they died from overeating or starved to death, depending on it. And so when he finally got captured, enslaved, and brought back to Karngrad, uh, people who saw that he could count sort of there was people who saw the value in that, so he sort of like earned his freedom, quote unquote, and is just like an accountant in Karngrad. He manages everybody's numbers. He makes sure war bands get paid, mouths to feed, bills to pay, just manages that for people who have need for it but have more interest in cracking skulls than counting coins.
The man walks the path to glory as
There's,
a civic leader.
I mean, there's an old, I guess it's a World War One quote that just nails down the head. Is that the infantry wins the battles, but the logistics wins the wars. If you don't have that person who can keep track of your resources, it doesn't matter how good the warrior class is.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because, in regards to like the zealotry, the difference in zealotry that we see, the zealots are in the field, but Kavoth is doing the heavy lifting, and he's the guy in the office. He's the guy that you meet him on your first day, and you think, yeah, I can work here.
And it kind of seems like Kavath might be completely separate from the spiritual/devotional aspects of chaos, but I didn't really have time to go into it in the campaign because he didn't really have time. But his connection to that is kind of more in line with like Victorian era spiritualism, where basically he lights a bunch of candles, does a lot of drugs, and then vibes out in his office to speak to the gods.
The man is a hardcore, like, he 100% buys into the romantics.
Yes, yeah.
Like, it is all about the feeling. He probably even looks at it and goes like, ah, yes, the anima.
Yeah, the ethereal void is his term for the realm of chaos / the warp. What?
Well, and it's funny too, because he still recognizes that those have real physical
yes.
places in the world. I mean, look at Asavash, for example. Like, he hits it off with Asavash. Romantically or platonically, I honestly can't tell. I think it's both and neither at the same time.
I was gonna say, I don't think either of them can tell either.
But it's one of those things where, like, he knows exactly what Asavash is. And he, I think he even made the joke, like, oh yes, an emissary of the god of lies is telling a lie. Whatever. Like, he knows exactly what these things are.
Yeah.
And yet he still has his own relationship and understanding with it. And I think that's really interesting because, pivoting back to Iron you do that a lot. I mean, especially with, the Knights of the Everking. But in your own way, you often... you don't... I think this is a really important thing to... good advice for any narrative player is you never challenge directly what the established setting is. But you challenge the way your fellow players understand it. And I do believe on some level you do that on purpose. Like, the reason... like, it's not that you necessarily... you do enjoy the narrative angle.
I love
the but the big reason why you enjoy that narrative angle is because you want to challenge the player, not the character.
I love the screw of people. I get a kick out of it when they spend 5 weeks interacting with me in an event and then realize that, oh yeah, I'm playing the evil army. It's funny every time.
Well, and I think
there was a couple people who blew up at me once because Well, if I knew
Oh
I
my
was working
gosh.
with, if I knew I was working with Chaos, my character never would have talked to you. And why do you think I don't go around screaming, praise the 8-point star?
Yeah.
It's not practical. It's not good for business.
Mm-mm.
We're here to do a job.
Hmm.
That job
Yeah, like-
says find the witch, document the witch, and beat up whoever is aiding and abetting the witches that won't join.
Document the witch.
Look,
that was
now
my
I'm
favorite.
imagining the witch.
witches
finder
are allowed
general.
to. They're allowed to go do whatever they want for other people as long as we know they're there. Rogue magic users get into trouble,
I am now
often
imagining.
at the hands of pitchforks and torches.
Yeah.
We
The
can't
witch
come to
finder
your
gen-
legal defense if we don't know that you're there.
Exactly. The Witchfinder General is somehow the most unique, terrible cultural anthropologist and also a cop.
The
Paladin
titles
behavior.
the title starts a joke from watching Good Omens, where they have the Royal Order of Witchfinders, who are just horribly inept, but also in the modern day, it's one guy who is knowingly taking payments from both an angel and a devil, and fooling them both into thinking that he's got hundreds of men working for him exclusively for that celestial or infernal being.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
absolutely
kinda-
a big con, but no one calls him
I
on
love-
it. No one questions it. It's not even raised as a point in the show that do the angel or devil even care? Do they know that he's playing both sides? I don't know. He does good enough work. We pay him.
Yeah, I absolutely love Terry Pratchett and Good Omens. Big influence on kind of like the because I read it really young, and yeah, it is kind of a big influence on like viewing something that maybe I don't necessarily believe in, like the Christian Abrahamic religions, and sort of like tilting them in a way that adds a lot of nuance to the conflict that's supposed to be painted in such stark black and white. And
Yeah.
I think kind of reading and understanding things like that is a huge step to upping your game in terms of making your good guys more relatably human and making your bad guys more gray and understandable.
Yeah,
think
bad guys
that's-
don't think they're bad, even if we're on
Mm-hmm.
evil team. We have a reason for what we're doing.
Yeah.
Why does our reason need to sound like an unhinged cartoon villain?
Yeah, to connect it to 40K, I bet you there's not a single Primarch who would prefer it if they were still slaves of the Emperor, you know?
Yeah.
No, I think that's reasonable. I really can't speak to that, in truth be told, but that was actually, it's funny because you guys kind of like started going down the path I was about to steer us down, which is, you know, Iron takes a much more like dutiful sense but that still comes from morality though, in the same way that Kavoth's morality is duty on some level, you know, like a little bit of a slight altering of each other. But one of the things that I really like that Iron does a lot, and I kind of want to talk about this a bit more, is non-traditional chaos on some level challenges other players on what their definition of evil is.
Yeah.
And I know that's another way of saying, you know, where's the line? But I think asking the question that way brings about a different answer.
I think it's more about saying not where's the line, but more like what kind of lens filter does your camera have that you see this as purely a black and white issue.
What is a line? Yeah.
Well, exactly. And this is one of the reasons why, like, I really appreciate, you know, bringing up, like, Pratchett. When I've actually never read Pratchett either. I'm actually a total literature noob. Although
You gotta.
I have had people read my writing and say, "Oh, you definitely read Pratchett," and I went, "No, I haven't." This has happened multiple times, so I'm like, maybe I should just read Pratchett finally. But one of the things that I think we're going to take a little more of a philosophical route now, is one of the questions, overarching questions that we ask on Charge Everything is the role of narrative in humanity. What I mean by that is there is a reason why the Iliad survived. There is a reason why various stories from the Bible get told today outside of a religious sense. There's a reason why we latch on to stories. And there's a reason why we keep telling stories. And I think on some level, that really boils down to what we think is important. One of my favorite movies is Secondhand Lions. And in it, Uncle Hub has, the How to Be a Man speech. And you never actually hear the speech. But one of the segments in it, he's like, you do get one little segment of it. And it's, a man has to believe in some things to survive. That good will triumph over evil. That love can defeat anything.
I just rewatched that movie.
It's my favorite movie. And while some parts of it may not have aged well, although I think it's a really important movie. And I think non-traditional chaos really tackles this particular, element of our humanity well. Because in the same way that Tarantino does, where Tarantino certainly has a lot of shades of gray that are extremely justified.
Yeah.
Non-traditional chaos really asks us hard questions about our lives. It's funny because on some level, I think the best way that you can play non-traditional chaos is to understand Uncle Iroh. Because if you don't understand a character that,
this makes sense.
You're not going to do it well. You're going to struggle. Or you might not struggle with it, but I think that's really narrow. Maybe perhaps I'm making it too narrow, but you have to understand you have to have a lot of wisdom in order to really understand the role that non-traditional chaos plays. Because in many ways, there are a lot of good guys that are members of chaos, even though they are probably definitely bad guys. But there's been more than a few characters that come to mind that were the good guys. Or, I'll do this one for Kai, because he's not here. There was a moment. The short of it is his love interest was a sorceress of Tzeentch. And she's like, I can't be with you partially because you're not of chaos and you should come to chaos. Yeah. But I'm also not going to be with you if you think you can pull me away. Spoiler alert, he does pull her away. But he has to make a choice. Having no land of his own, because that was stripped from him. He has to make a choice in Astalia. There's this subplot that happened in the old forum Fantasy Battles Animosities that involved Malal. And the idea was, are you going to side with the cultists of Malal, independent of your coalition, and break out Malal, or are you going to stop them from doing it? And this Bretonnian, who has fought chaos all his life, and for that matter, when I listen to Bretonnian characters, I find Kai tends to be the most intensely moral. And he helps free Malal.
Ooh, big decision, yeah.
Because by introducing a fifth Chaos God into the Great Game, it weakens the other four. And maybe now he can set her free.
Which is an actual plot point Stigmar's using right now.
Exactly. And actually, it's funny that you mentioned that, because we have a fifth Chaos God. We have the God of Desperation, who's going to be a huge deal for this.
Praise the rat. Praise the
rat. Praise the Great Horned Rat. My first army was Skaven, so I get to say that. We have a God of Desperation. The driving cause behind much of Chaos's sympathies is desperation. I mean, I don't think it's a secret that many of the most sympathetic Black Library Chaos characters have been Nurgle.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to, even like the Rotmire Creed that wanted to I mean, they kind of like trend towards more wanting to find immortality, but a lot of that comes from trying to prevent disease. In the first Black Talon book, we see this as well. I'm gonna butcher his name, but it's like Ormagalots or something like that. Something that's fucking unpronounceable. His whole thing was, I wanted to save my village from this disease. And he's just turned to Nurgle in the process. I mean, we see this time and time and time again. It's basically a Black Library trope at this point. And now
there's Josh Reynolds' Order of the Fly, who are sympathetic Nurglings, who are kind of like they're kind of like Iron's characters, sort of
They
like
very much are.
chivalric Nurgle knights. Decent guys. They go to tourneys, they take care of their peasants, and they, vomit clouds of black flies that devour their prey alive. It's just the thing they do.
It's just what knights do. Do your knights not do this?
Yeah. What,
I mean,
what
Sigmar's knights are lightning bolts.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the difference
These
between
knights-
flies and lightning bolts?
These knights do
It's like-
flies. It's more druidic. It's more natural.
Yeah,
lightning. That's not
Listen.
natural.
Lightning is like if a bunch of flies the size of like a particle exploded.
Yeah, exactly, guys. It's the
There
same
we go.
thing.
Just
They're just throwing fireflies around. See, it's literally the same thing.
I mean, you would not believe your eyes if 10 million fireflies.
Oh no!
But like, so there is this god of desperation, which I think is going to do a lot for sympathetic chaos, and I'm actually really eager to explore that.
Oh
realm,
yeah.
is the understanding that the street urchin now has a relatable chaos god. The most average Joe has the most relatable thing. It's not ambition. It's not an aspiration. It's I just want to get by. And I think that is so fascinating for chaos, because every part of chaos so far has involved a great deal of aspiration.
Power.
Aspiration for more than what you have, regardless of if you are sympathetic or not. It is a lot of the times it has been about wanting more than what you have. And now we have one that's about just keeping what you have.
Yeah.
That connects to one of the tropes I liked in 40k, is that it doesn't matter which god you serve, just trying to be better at serving your god empowers Slaanesh. Well, here the flip side of that is, if being desperate is what drives most people to chaos, it doesn't matter which god you serve, you're empowering the rat. And the rat is just here in the Great Game to mess with everyone else. He's not in it to play this millennia-long game like the other four have been. He wants to win.
Yeah.
And that's why Archaon was like, yeah, you can share the table now.
Yeah, the new Age of Sigmar, the core book lore and some of the like Skaven material emphasizing that there are like human horned rat people is just like so cool. I think maybe Warhammer Fantasy made allusions to that at one time, but I feel like this is the most explicit we've ever gotten for confirmation
Fantasy
for that, even if they don't have models yet.
By making jokes about Skaven being the Ratmen and just lumping them Beastmen. And then the jokes that the Ratmen don't exist.
Yeah, so I'm actually really excited for this because, and I'm going to go back to Old Animosity lore that I know neither of you know, but at the end of the last Animosity Forum campaign, because I didn't get to do another because then the end times happened, there was a ritual chance to banish the Chaos Gods, because the whole point was that the Chaos Wastes were receding, and the following up, because of how badly Chaos had gotten beaten in every campaign, and the follow-up to it was going to be people trying to colonize and settle these new lands that are finally habitable to everyday people again. Funny enough, all three except for Tzeentch get banished. Except for Malal. Malal doesn't get banished. But in the process, the Skaven players got together and ascended the Great Horde Rat.
Yes.
And this was a thing people were really excited to see. Was so now we actually get to see it in an official capacity. And for me, at least, because I enjoy some of the deep lore aspects, I'm excited to see some possible continuity again. Now that we have like an official lore coming out of old animosity only lore and coming into now official lore where this is a thing. And like I'm actually really excited to see that, and it kind of makes me want to play like this Great Horned Rat Chaos person because it would be really fun. And I never want to play. I don't enjoy playing Chaos. I straight
Mark
up I
got
don't.
the Great Horned Rat. Mark got the
Praise
Great Horned Rat.
Praise the rat. But yeah, no. Every act of desperation feeds the Great Horned Rat.
Yeah.
And I'm
Like, that's
really-
kind of one of the things that you can really take into any of the Chaos Gods is that kind of their positive aspects have been downplayed or even removed at a certain point, but you can almost still see them.
Oh, they are
And
definitely there.
yeah, playing those aspects up is kind of how you go from maim, kill, burn to all I wanted was the truth, you know?
That's part of why going between A2 and A3 people stopped calling the gods by their names and
Yeah.
switched to honoring these four paragons. It made them
Oh man,
less obvious, but the idea came from I saw some random picture online that was art of the four chaos gods, like Greek gods, or in that
Yeah.
medieval
I
manuscript.
remember this. I'm
Or,
gonna find these. I'm gonna try to find
the
them real
Saint
quick.
Rastard style, and then listing
Yeah.
all their positive virtues.
Yeah, no. Let me try to
So
find
talking
that art
about
real quick.
Norgal's not the god of decay; he's the god of life and the harvest. What polytheistic culture doesn't have a god of life and harvest and rain and the good crops?
yeah,
Medicine was even in his domain because so many medicines are derived from organic things. That wasn't the one I saw, but that is very cool.
It is very
that is
cool.
really cool, yeah.
I'll keep trying to find it while you guys keep talking.
But so
because this one
that-
seemed a little more overt than.
One of the
what you
narratives
intended.
I submitted for A3 had one of my characters giving this whole speech to a bunch of new recruits about we're not following the gods. Some of you have been told we worship these chaos gods. That's not us. Here are the four things we honor. Here's why we honor them. But at the end of the day, we're not fighting in the name of these spirits. We're fighting for you people to get your homes back.
Yeah. Yeah,
And this is why
one of the
we
things
believe
even-
that we should do that. Is this, which is an interesting concept because that's
And
something
that is
kind
why
of Bretonia
we're
balances
teaching
as well.
all you peasants how to be pyromancers. Because there is a vampire in a flying castle that we can all see the castle. We can all see the vampire dragons flying around it. And you know what's great at getting rid of undead? Fire. So we're going to teach you all some basic pyromancy. And we're going to go storm the castle, get rid of the vampire, and you can go back to your farm lives.
Yeah.
That was what we were doing there.
And that's I think something you mentioned earlier is another good way to keep chaos kind of fresh is pseudonyms, different titles, different avatars, different faces. Just
Yeah.
come up with the aspect of the
One of the
gods that
things-
your character most embodies.
Warcry does great is
Mm-hmm.
all those original bespoke war bands, none of them openly follow one of the big four names.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
can
they do,
look
like,
at
the
some of their
Great
lore and go,
Gatherer.
these people who enjoyed the sensation of cutting off their limbs, I wonder who they're actually following.
Mhm.
What a puzzle.
Or the Maggot Lord for the Rotmire.
Oh, I'm talking all the pre-Rotmire ones. Like
Oh,
the,
yeah.
the
Oh, I
Untamed
was-
Beast, they honor the
Mhm.
spirit of the hunt, who likes bloody sacrifices. Okay, it doesn't
Um,
take a genius to figure out what Chaos Aligned entity would support hunting and bloody sacrifices.
I don't think this.
One of the fun.
They don't see it as corn, and corn followers wouldn't recognize what they're doing either.
Yeah, one of the fun things for me about that was always like connecting it with other possible deities it could be. Like, uh, any of them could be the Scions of the Flames great fire.
Oh yeah.
Well, and that's one of the things that like a lot of official lore touches on too is a lot of these deities that different cultures had across the realms ended up either being so there's like three different interpretations of it, and the first one is they were actual gods that the chaos gods swallowed and subsumed and consumed themselves, so that whenever people worshipped them, they actually worshipped chaos. The other one is that they were always chaos, and it was just chaos by 1,000 different names, and which is slightly different than saying they were never gods, but what they did happened to empower chaos. So it's more about, is it actually chaos, or was it just what they were doing empowering chaos? And I'm pretty sure, I think on some, like, it depends on the author, but like all of these are on some level true.
Yeah, it's super based on who's actually writing the book at the time.
It's super based on how much colonialism are you willing to ascribe to Sigmar at any given time.
Yes.
Like, I'm
the
just
correct
going to
answer
flat
is
out call that out.
all of it. But on the pseudonym point, don't just give the Chaos Gods pseudonyms either. We can look at all the other gods of the Pantheon and their other aspects.
Yeah.
My Chaos Kingdom has a hateful relationship with Ilario. She's the Witch of the Woods. Her followers come out of the forest and abduct people who are just trying to live their lives. Because they needed firewood in the winter, so they cut down a tree. And so, oh no, the forest spirits came out and brutally murdered them. Sigmar's the Stormbringer. Well, storms are always, or have that traditional connotation of being ominous. And then you read a book, it's the second Warcry one. Blood of the Everchosen, I think?
Yes.
Where it's focused on a Scions of the Flame and a Splinter Fang warband. The antagonists are 3 Vanguard Hunters. Just 3 of them.
Yeah.
And you watch them just brutally dominate entire warbands at a time.
Which book is that?
Yeah.
Warcry, Catacombs, Blood of the Everchosen.
Oh,
so you have these 2 warbands that are competing for this baby, who one of them thinks it's actually Archaon's kid, and the other has a vision where the kid will grow up and challenge Archaon. And so they're both trying to appease Archaon, because they live out at 8 points. And so they're intimately familiar with who Archaon is and all that. The Stormcasts are sent by Sigmar to go kill a baby.
Yeah.
And there's this interlude before the Stormcasts actually show up, where you have this old woman telling this horror story about how she survived an attack by Stormcast before. She doesn't know they're called Stormcasts, but she describes this, and there's just enough clues that you can piece together, oh crap, this is what she's talking about.
Yeah.
And then the next chapter is 3 Stormcasts wandering around 8 points at a place where you just saw the 2 warbands fight.
Yeah.
They're very clearly stalking and hunting. And they just casually reference how they've already killed like 3 warbands while on this trail that were also trying to chase down and get this baby.
Yeah, that's another really great book. It and the Warcry anthology, both for kind of seeing different facets of chaos. The Warcry anthology has a story with a sympathetic unnamed what are the skinless people?
Unmade.
The Unmade, yeah. There's a sympathetic Unmade story. Like, it's still kind of
that
gnarly
one's
and
creepy.
brutal. But yeah, it's just super creepy, kind of putting you in this headspace and then making it make sense.
It's actually, I actually love that you guys brought up both those examples, because I think those are really like I don't want to say they're cornerstones, but I think they have a lot of cornerstone concepts. It's actually even something that's explored a little bit in the Stormcast perspective books. So in the in Black Talon First Mark, when Neve comes across, the lone human survivor of this Nurgle infestation, the first thing that she does is shoot at her. Like, Neve gets shot at, like, immediately. And basically the girl tells her, like, you need to fuck off and go home. Because I know exactly what you're going to do. Because I've watched your kind butcher mine just as much as I've watched Nurgle. We prayed for rain. And we finally got rain, and it was plague. And it's kind of interesting because the other thing that you see is you realize that their life god is both Alariel and Nurgle combined. Which is super cool as well. But, that's the first thing that she's like, no, like, I've seen that golden armor. It slaughtered my friends. And then Nurgle came and slaughtered me too. Like, I don't know what you want with me. And it's something that Neve has to reckon with, is the realization that, oh crap, what we do is sometimes really terrible. And it's funny because she reckons with this again in, I think the book is just called, I think the new one's literally just called Black Talon. She reckons with that again. There, under a slightly different premise, where she realizes the role of faith in mortals is not simply because the gods are real, but because it plays a very real societal role that helps us keep going, it helps us keep living. And she has to reckon with that. And I'm not going to talk about the content of that book as much, just because it's not been out as long. But
much newer,
it is much newer. But I definitely recommend reading both. They don't build off of each other at all. They're actually not even that good as far as Black Library goes. I'm sorry, I loved them because it's fun to watch Neve gut 20 men in the span of 10 seconds. But
no, that's fair.
It's something that I just want to bring up because it's not necessarily always the chaos content, where chaos is the POV. You see this in other, from the Stormcast perspective as well. Especially like the Stormcast battle tome, you see a lot of sympathetic chaos. They really don't beat around the bush that Stormcast has a lot of problems, and then they have a lot of problems. But that's something for the Stormcast episode that I actually already have lined up. But
I guess while we're talking about Black Library stuff, I'd throw Scourge of Fate out there as well.
Okay.
It's not an amazing book, but what it's amazing for is the main protagonist is one step short of being a Varangard. And it's just the view of how is Archaon chaos different from godly chaos. A recurring theme of the book is everyone who's sworn to the Everchosen looks down on someone who actually sold their soul to a god, because that was weak. They saw the path, and they gave up halfway through, because the soul is the ultimate commodity the gods want, and the gods want souls. You don't have to give it to them. They will just give you stuff to try. So they have this grand tournament that features that Ord the Fly we're talking about, jousting against a Tzeentch knighthood. And the opening event for the tournament is they get 88 captives. And they bring out this Varangard with a giant hammer, and he just smashes all the skulls so that Khorne can't have them. And then they clean up the blood. And the words they use in the book, I kid you not, are, we're reminding Khorne of his place. Next time, we'll remind one of the other gods.
Love that.
And it's just like, oh, we're going here. We are... These are people who know they're serving chaos, refer to what they're doing as serving the dark gods, and are willing to spit in their eyes to make a point that you need us more than we need you.
And I think it's funny that you mentioned that, and that you mentioned like the way that we describe the gods, because it's something I've personally done as well with Vaethan, where what I tried to do was emulate the kennings from Norse poetry. And I didn't do it very well, but it didn't really matter because it only ever came up for like 2 or 3 gods. But, because she holds a special hatred for Khorne, but also Sigmar. So, he's the Thunder Conqueror. He's not Sigmar. I forgot what I had for Khorne, which is really awkward because I should really remember that one. But I think it was literally it's the slaughterer. Like he's
Yeah,
just
that
the
tracks.
slaughterer. That's all he does. Which now, granted, that was an exercise in trying to find the dividing line of violence, just in raw violence. But
Right,
it's,
because she's ultimately faithful of Gorka Morka. They're not exactly gods of peace themselves.
no, they're not.
Yeah.
But my point is like that's not a lesson that how we characterize and think about the gods is not necessarily just a lesson in chaos. That's a lesson for anybody, which is just like a small like tangential side point I wanted to make, because I mean like she even thought of, I think, Gorka Morka at times as like a god of life, and it's like no, the hunter says the hunt sustains life. You kill something, you eat it, it fosters life, so you have to respect life. And it's like, what the fuck? That's Alariel's thing. It's like, no, it's not. It's Gorka Morka's thing. What are you on?
What are you talking about?
But that's an exercise that anybody can do, but is especially prominent for chaos and how we understand the gods. Especially now that there's 5, or I mean, well, I guess Vashtor isn't technically in Age of Sigmar because
No,
he's a
Vashtor's
demigod.
not.
Yeah.
He's
But
a
we have-
demigod, not a
We
not
have
like a minor
Hashit
god.
as a minor god instead.
We have what?
Yeah.
We have Hashit,
Oh, that's right. we have
the
Hashit.
Chaos Dwarf god of tyranny and slavery, and
Also upsetting engineers.
yeah,
Yep. Yeah. Industry.
industry. That's the other one. Yeah.
I kind of forget Hashit even exists, which is really bad. I really shouldn't
So-
forget that.
It's very weird because Hashit exists in Sigmar lore. They talk about Hashit. Hashit's all over the place in Warcry lore. And like
He's not here yet.
Scourge of Fate talks about how almost all the Chaos Dwarves are serving Archaon. Not
Yeah.
serving Archaon on behalf of Hashit like the Gaunt Summoners do. No, they see the war machine that Archaon's made and they've signed up.
They're like, hell yeah, brother.
And War of the Everchosen, or Wrath of the Everchosen, we talked about that a little bit ago now. One of the
Yeah.
major battles is in one of their fortresses. That's like butting off the Varenspire. So the Chaos Dwarves exist. Their god is present in the setting. But the people that everyone associates as the followers of Hashit, as far as we've seen them in Sigmar lore, are really just serving Archaon at this point. With like 2 mentions to them in places serving Hashit instead. And one of those is over in Cruel Boys, where it's just a wink wink nudge nudge situation.
It's literally just the lore for why you have a hand grenade weapon profile. I'm not even
Yeah,
joking.
it's we traded with these dwarves who serve their dark god. And then the other one is the Horns of Hashit Warband, who
The
so many people
just-
are mad about them not having a single dwarf, and it was kind of funny.
That is kind of funny.
But their lore is these are meant to be like the scouts and the fodder for Hashit's legions.
Well, and that's the funniest
The-
part is like we keep getting these allusions to Hashit, but the only thing that we ever see is the most minor bottom rung. The only time people
Yeah.
we ever see are the ones singing 16 tons.
We see the
yeah.
dwarves, like the sorcerers, in places. Some of those Slaves of Darkness lore, they're the people who make all that plate armor that the legions wear. There's just
The,
Legion of Asgore is sitting off in 8 points, making arms and armor for Archaon.
The Age of Sigmar 4th edition book also has a couple of direct mentions of Hashitian Dwarden, and even has spots on the map where they rule,
That's crazy.
just on a bunch of different
Like,
maps.
they've-
Yeah.
There's been a spot on the action map since first edition when it was still Technicolor maps,
Yeah, that like
where
weird...
there was a designated oil rig just off the ocean in the Syrian Sea that was
Yeah.
very explicitly Chaos Dwarfs serving
Yeah.
Hashit. That's been there since the start of Age of Sigmar.
Yeah, yeah. I really think they're pushing towards them right now.
I'm firmly in the camp that they'll happen eventually, but Chaos
Yeah.
Dwarves win is the Sigmar version of Emperor's Children next year.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a meme.
And-
It'll
and
happen
somehow-
eventually. The people supporting the meme will be right eventually, and they'll act like they weren't wrong for a decade first.
Yes.
To be fair, at least they weren't wrong in second edition. They had rules, so they've only been
Yeah.
wrong for 3 years.
They had third edition rules.
Did they really?
Oh yeah, and Legends. Yeah.
They were Legends rules.
Oh my god, I didn't know they even had third edition.
It was a PDF on Warcom they never even put in the app.
Oh my god, that's really.
You can find it on Wahapedia.
I didn't even know that
Yeah.
they had that. That's insane.
They weren't great rules, but they had them. They
No.
existed.
They had to make sure that they weren't actually a real army this time. We're like in second edition
Yeah.
where they were actually a semi-real army because they actually had decent rules.
Yeah, no, none of that nonsense in third. But the
Yeah,
rules
yeah.
were
Don't
there.
need
You
people-
could play a Legion of Asgore army.
Buying old minis.
Shout out to the time Legion of Asgore won a Age of Sigmar tournament.
Or
That was
recasts for most of them anymore.
awkward. I think that there's some pretty good
Well-
proxies these days, but regardless,
I have got 5 minutes before I have to get dressed for work.
I think we're wrapping up anyway. So I guess
Yeah.
we didn't really overtly give any advice, but I think this is a beneficial. Well, I mean, we don't have to though. Is the thing. Like I think fitting in the spirit of narrative and what non-traditional chaos is. I think it's better if on some of it is if we don't give any direct advice and we instead make people listen to it and they have to like think about what's being said and what their takeaways are, because I think that.
Yeah.
On some level, I think that's the correct philosophical exercise here. And
Yeah.
I think,
If I had to give explicit advice as to how to make your perfect chaos character, it would be just the same advice I'd give when you're coming up with any character. Just go into academic or journalistically, just who, what, when, where, why, and how. And you just need to know all those questions for your character's history to kind of know both where they came from and where they're going.
I think the big point I'd make is chaos, like it or not, is inherently tied to the gods. So you have to give some consideration of how your character views the gods. But not just the chaos gods. Look at the entire pantheon of the setting. Maybe your character has a real hatred of Morta. And that somehow manifests into why they're serving chaos in some capacity.
yeah,
It doesn't have to be that chaos gods are bad guys and all the other gods are good guys, except Nagash. They're obviously the worst.
Yes,
But
yeah. Screw that guy.
you need some like the gods are active players in this setting. On all sides of the spectrum, someone's hero's god is going to be villains for others.
Yeah.
yeah.
What's your beef with Morta or Alariel or Teclis? I mean, okay, Teclis is another bad example, like Nagash, but still.
Lots of reasons to have beef with him. Hey, just because you're asking what your beef is with him doesn't mean you're discounting all the other reasons to have beef with him.
You know what? Valid.
It's okay
What
that
is
some of these
your-
questions are easier
What
to
is
answer
your
than others.
beef? What is your beef
Yeah.
with Teclis? Not what is everyone's beef with Teclis. How's that?
Yeah.
I think my overt advice would be, and because I have to always ask the deep question, give the deep answer, is really channel your understanding of what life is about. Because I think if you do that, and you consciously choose to do that through the lens of chaos, you will create something far more compelling and far more compelling than you realize, and probably something that's going to teach you things about yourself. And inherently, telling a story teaches us lessons.
Yeah.
And I would say that if you need specific media examples, the thing I would look at is look at the gray hero and think about what that looks like when it's reversed a little bit. again, I don't like going back to him, but and necessarily in this example, but what Sir Kai does with Malal is very much something that a Chaos character would do.
Yeah.
And he's a Bretonnian
Looking at-
knight. He is on the surface the exact opposite of that. On
Yeah.
the surface. You don't necessarily, I mean, to quote Five Finger Death Punch, you don't necessarily need to be on the wrong side of heaven or the righteous side of hell to play a nuanced Chaos character. But I would say, think about what matters to you as a person and think about your understanding of life. And I think you will find a really compelling Chaos character there. I think everybody would find a really compelling Chaos character there. And what that says about us is perhaps, that's for another time. But and that would be my advice, just from listening to this conversation. I want to thank you both a lot. I know, so keep going.
Just make people. Don't make an archetype, make a person.
Yeah. For sure. I wanted to thank you both a lot for being on here. This was definitely a conversation I think Kai would have really liked to have been a part of. So I can't wait to see what he says when he listens to this episode. And it's kind of weird to me that I'm bringing up more examples about him than he usually does, but I felt like they related more than like Vaethan does. Vaethan does not really relate well to this conversation because her story is not really about that kind of thing. But Kai's was also a lot about that kind of thing. So,
and if Kai's got lots of thoughts on it, we can always come back and redo it.
Oh yeah, I'd love to do a round 2.
I would definitely love to do a round 2 as well. So thank you both for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. If you like this kind of thing, you should subscribe to our YouTube channel. We occasionally post content, and we try to talk a little bit more about narrative events, but we really never managed to get the episode out in time. I think our Everwinter Con episode came out after the con, and then it was after the con that it was edited, then we had to re-record it about what it was about instead of hyping up the event. That was really awkward. But we sometimes post episodes. I'm hoping to post episodes more frequently. Coming up, I might have a crew lined up for the more traditional Chaos episode, and I am pleased to announce that I got he doesn't play in Animosity anymore, but he's a big Soulbound player over on the Great Weave. So we've got
Excellent.
a good friend of mine coming on for the Stormcast episode. And then I have another friend of mine from Animosity coming on for Seraphon. And we might have a couple going on for Skaven. So, I got about 4 or 5 episodes in the works right now. So you should definitely stay tuned for those. Thank you very much, Sasha and Iron, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you for having me on. I was glad to be here.
It was a pleasure.
And remember, chaos good.
I was going to say charge everything. Charge everything.
Well, yeah, that's why we ride the horses.
Exactly.
And we have the
get
coolest horses.
Yeah, exactly. See, we both get it. We both like our Arthurian knights. The difference is mine would fight you to the death in Extreme Prejudice. Anyway, have a good night, everybody.
Farewell.
Good night.
Day to lose control. There's a fire in my bones. My sight gets blurry, pushing back the tears. Should take a leap of faith and face my fear. I blame it on the voices that are in my